The bullet had torn through Colton Harper's chest with such force that Doc Holloway swore no man could survive it. Yet 21 days later, the cowboy's eyes finally opened to see a face he barely recognized through the fog of his awakening mind. Emma Jane Winters sat in the wooden chair beside his bed, her honey-colored hair falling in unwashed waves around her pale face, dark circles beneath her green eyes telling the story of sleepless nights and relentless devotion. The room smelled of carbolic and copper, the faint morning light filtering through the dusty window of Doc Holloway's medical office in Montezuma, Colorado. It was early September in 1884, and the mountain air carried the first whisper of autumn's chill. Colton's throat felt like sandpaper, and when he tried to speak, only a rasp emerged. Emma's eyes widened, and she leaned forward so quickly the chair scraped against the floorboards. Her hand found his, and he felt the tremor in her fingers, the warmth of her skin against his own cold palm. "Do not try to talk," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse and crying. "You have been gone for so long, just rest. You are safe now." He blinked slowly, trying to piece together the fragments of memory that danced just beyond his grasp. There had been a robbery. The Montezuma Bank. He remembered the flash of gunfire, the screams of townsfolk diving for cover, and the searing pain that had driven him to his knees in the dusty street. Everything after that moment existed only as darkness, punctuated by occasional dreams that might have been death itself beckoning him forward. Emma reached for the pitcher of water on the bedside table, her movements careful and practiced, as though she had done this 1,000 times in anticipation of this moment. She held a tin cup to his lips, and he managed a few sips before his body protested. The water tasted like salvation. 3 weeks, she said quietly, setting the cup aside. "You have been unconscious for 3 weeks, Colton. The doctor said you would die. Everyone said you would die, but I knew. I knew you were stronger than that." He studied her face, confusion mixing with the pain that radiated from his chest. Emma Jane Winters. He knew her, of course. Everyone in Montezuma knew everyone else. She worked at the general store, had moved to town maybe 8 months prior from somewhere back east. Pennsylvania, he thought. They had spoken perhaps a dozen times, brief exchanges over purchases of supplies or polite nods on the street. But why would she sit vigil for a man she barely knew, as if reading his thoughts? Emma's cheeks flushed pink, and she looked down at their joined hands. "I imagine you are wondering why I am here." He managed a slight nod, the movement sending waves of dizziness through his skull. "The day of the shooting," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I was coming out of the mercantile when it happened. You were walking past the bank, just minding your own business when those men came running out. One of them pointed his gun at Mrs. Fletcher and her little girl. They were right there in the street, frozen with fear, and you did not hesitate. You drew your pistol and shot the man before he could pull the trigger." Emma's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she continued. "But his partner, the one still inside, he fired through the window. The bullet caught you in the chest and you went down. By the time anyone could react, the robbers were dead or dying, but you were bleeding out in the dirt. Mrs. Fletcher was screaming and her daughter was crying, and there was so much chaos. They brought you here, and Doc Holloway worked on you for hours. He got the bullet out, but you lost so much blood, you never woke up." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "That little girl, Sarah Fletcher, she is only 6 years old. You saved her life without thinking twice. And I realized, standing there watching them carry you away, that you were the kind of man this world cannot afford to lose. So when Doc said someone needed to watch over you, change your bandages, make sure fever did not take you in the night, I volunteered. I have been here ever since." Colton's mind struggled to process her words. 3 weeks. She had been here for 3 weeks caring for him while he lay senseless. He tried to speak again, and this time a whisper emerged. "Why?" "Because someone had to," Emma replied simply, "and because I wanted to." "You are a good man, Colton Harper. The world needs more men like you." The door to the room opened, and Doc Holloway entered, his weathered face breaking into a wide grin when he saw Colton's open eyes. The physician was in his 60s, with silver hair and steady hands that had saved countless lives over his decades of practice. "Well, I will be damned," Doc said, moving to the bedside. "Emma, you did it. You kept him alive long enough for his stubborn soul to find its way back." He began examining Colton with professional efficiency, checking his pulse, looking at his eyes, pressing gently around the bandaged wound. "Can you feel your legs? Wiggle your toes for me." Colton complied, relief flooding through him as his body responded, albeit weakly. "The bullet missed your heart by less than an inch," Doc explained. "Should have killed you outright, or at the very least left you bleeding out before we could get you here. You are either the luckiest man in Colorado or too mean to die." He chuckled at his own joke, but his eyes were serious. "You have a long recovery ahead, son. That wound needs time to heal properly, and you will need to rebuild your strength. But if you keep improving like this, I expect you will make a full recovery." Emma's shoulders sagged with relief, and Colton realized she had been carrying the weight of his survival on her conscience all this time. The realization stirred something in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with fever. Over the following days, Colton remained bedridden but grew stronger with each passing hour. Emma continued her vigil, though now she allowed herself to leave for brief periods to wash and change clothes. The women of Montezuma, grateful for Colton's heroism and touched by Emma's devotion, brought food and fresh linens. Mrs. Fletcher visited with little Sarah, who shyly presented Colton with a drawing of a cowboy on a horse, her way of saying thank you. During the long hours when it was just the two of them, Colton and Emma talked. She told him about her life in Philadelphia, how she had come west after her father died, leaving behind a world of strict social expectations and a suitor her mother had chosen for her. She spoke of feeling trapped in that life, suffocated by corsets and calling cards and conversations that never ventured beyond the weather and gossip. "I wanted to breathe," she said one afternoon as she helped him sit up to eat some broth. "I wanted to see mountains and sky and feel like my life belonged to me. Mother was horrified when I announced I was leaving, but my father had left me a small inheritance, enough to make the journey and establish myself. I have not regretted it for a single day." Colton, in turn, shared his own story. He had been born in Texas, the son of a cattle rancher who had died when a horse threw him. His mother had remarried, and his stepfather had been a hard man with a heavy hand. At 16, Colton had struck out on his own, working cattle drives and learning the ways of the range. He had come to Montezuma 2 years ago, drawn by the silver mining boom and the promise of honest work. He had been employed at the smelter, saving money with some vague dream of buying his own land someday. "Never thought much about settling down," he admitted, his voice still weak but growing steadier. "Always figured I was meant to keep moving, but there is something about these mountains. They make a man want to put down roots." "I know what you mean," Emma said, her eyes distant. "The first time I saw the peaks, I felt like I could finally breathe all the way down to my soul." As September gave way to October, Colton progressed from sitting up to standing with assistance, then to taking slow, shuffling steps around the room. Emma was always there, her arm steady around his waist when his legs threatened to give out, her encouraging words pushing him to try just one more lap around the small space. Doc Holloway marveled at the speed of his recovery, attributing it as much to Emma's care as to Colton's own constitution. The nature of their relationship began to shift during those quiet weeks. What had started as patient and nurse evolved into something deeper, a connection forged through vulnerability and trust. Colton found himself looking forward to Emma's arrival each morning, the way the lamplight caught the gold in her hair, the sound of her laugh when he made a dry observation about his predicament. Emma, for her part, discovered that the cowboy was more than just brave. He was thoughtful and well-read, surprisingly educated for a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. They discussed books and philosophy, dreams and regrets, finding common ground in unexpected places. One evening, as the first snow of the season began to dust the peaks visible through the window, Emma was reading aloud from a volume of poetry she had brought from her small, rented room. Colton watched her face in the lamplight, the way her lips moved around the words, and felt his heart do something it had never done before. It stumbled, then raced, and he knew with absolute certainty that he was falling in love with Emma Jane Winters. The realization should have terrified him. He had never allowed himself to care for anyone too deeply, always keeping people at arm's length to avoid the pain of loss. But lying in that bed, still weak and dependent, he found he did not want to fight the feeling. Emma had seen him at his most vulnerable, had cared for him when he could not care for himself, and never once had she flinched or faltered. She was stronger than any woman he had ever known and braver too. "Emma," he said softly, interrupting her reading. She looked up, concern flickering across her face. "Are you in pain? Should I fetch the doctor?" "No," he replied, reaching for her hand. She set the book aside and took it, her fingers threading through his. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything you have done. I know I can never truly repay you. You do not owe me anything," Emma said firmly. "I did what I wanted to do, what I needed to do." "But why?" he pressed, needing to understand. "We barely knew each other before all this. Why would you sacrifice 3 weeks of your life for a stranger?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, her thumb absently stroking the back of his hand. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You were not a stranger, not really. I noticed you the first week I arrived in Montezuma. You were different from the other men in town. You never leered or made crude comments when I walked by. You always tipped your hat and said good morning like you meant it. And I saw the way you helped old Mr. Peterson fix his wagon wheel that day in June, refusing any payment. The way you broke up that fight outside the saloon without throwing a single punch, just using your words and your presence. I thought to myself, there is a man worth knowing." She met his eyes, and he saw vulnerability there that matched his own. "When I saw you fall in that street, bleeding and still, something inside me broke. I could not stand the thought of you dying, of the world losing you when I had never even had the chance to really talk to you. So I stayed. And over these weeks, I have gotten to know you, Colton Harper. And I am so grateful that you survived, not just because you are a good man, but because I cannot imagine my life now without you in it." The confession hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Colton's heart hammered in his chest, and he knew this was the moment that would define everything that came after. He could retreat into safety, treat her words as those of a concerned friend and nothing more, or he could be as brave as she had been, laying her feelings bare. "I am falling in love with you," he said, the words coming out rough but honest. "Maybe I have been since I first woke up and saw you sitting there. Maybe it started before that, in all those brief moments when we passed on the street and I wished I had the courage to really speak to you. I do not know when it began, Emma. I just know that it is true." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling, radiant in the lamplight. "I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been since the day you saved that little girl without a second thought for your own life." Colton tugged gently on her hand and she leaned down, bringing her face close to his. Their first kiss was soft and tentative, tasting of salt from her tears and the sweetness of hope. When they parted, both were breathing hard, and Emma rested her forehead against his. "We are going to have quite a story to tell our grandchildren someday," she whispered. "That we will," he agreed, already thinking of a future he had never dared to imagine before. The following week saw Colton's strength return in earnest. By late October, he was walking without assistance and able to leave Doc Holloway's office for short excursions around town. The first place he wanted to go was the general store where Emma worked, eager to see her in her element. The proprietor, a kind woman named Mrs. Abernathy, had been generous about Emma's prolonged absence, understanding the circumstances and grateful for Colton's heroism. When they walked through the door together, Mrs. Abernathy took one look at their clasped hands and beaming faces and laughed with delight. "Well, it is about time. The whole town has been waiting for you two to realize what was obvious to everyone else." Emma blushed but did not let go of Colton's hand. "We are courting," she announced, the words filled with quiet pride. "And planning to do this properly," Colton added, "with respect and intention." Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "As it should be. Emma, dear, you take the rest of the day. Show this young man around town now that he is back on his feet." They spent the afternoon walking the streets of Montezuma, Colton moving slowly but steadily, Emma at his side. The town was a bustling mix of miners, merchants, and families, nestled in a valley surrounded by towering peaks that were now dusted with snow. The San Juan Mountains rose on all sides, their majesty a constant reminder of nature's power and beauty. Townspeople stopped to welcome Colton back, shaking his hand and expressing their gratitude for his actions. Mrs. Fletcher nearly tackled him with a hug, Sarah hiding behind her mother's skirts before peeking out to wave shyly. The sheriff, a gruff man named Dalton, clapped him on the shoulder and told him the town was lucky to have him. "You ever want a job as deputy, you let me know," Sheriff Dalton said. "We could use a man with your courage and quick thinking." Colton thanked him but made no commitments. His brush with death had clarified his priorities, and wearing a badge was not among them. He wanted a quieter life, one built around home and family and the woman walking beside him. As they reached the edge of town, where the road gave way to wilderness, and the sound of the river rushing over rocks filled the air, Colton stopped and turned to Emma. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and her face was gilded in the warm light. "I want to build a life with you," he said, no preamble or hesitation. "I want to buy some land and build a house, raise horses, maybe some cattle, wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night. I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards, but there is nothing conventional about how we came together. I know my heart, Emma, and my heart belongs to you." Emma's eyes shimmered with tears, but her smile was incandescent. "My heart belongs to you too, Colton. It has since the day I chose to stay by your bedside. I want all of those things. I want to build a life with you in these mountains where we can both finally be free." They kissed as the sun dipped below the peaks, the air crisp and clean, the future stretching before them like an unwritten page waiting to be filled with their story. The winter of 1884 was harsh in the mountains, but Colton and Emma faced it together. He had recovered enough to return to work at the smelter, though Doc Holloway made him promise not to overexert himself for at least another month. Emma continued her work at the general store, and in the evenings, They would meet at the boarding house where Colton rented a room or at Emma's small quarters above the dress shop. They sat by the fire and made plans, dreaming of the ranch they would build and the family they would raise. By December, Colton had saved enough money to make an offer on a parcel of land just outside town. It was 200 acres of valley and foothill, with a creek running through it and views of the mountains that took his breath away. The previous owner had been an older miner who had decided to move back east, and he was willing to sell for a fair price. Colton signed the papers with hands that trembled slightly, overwhelmed by the reality of owning land, of having something permanent for the first time in his life. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling softly outside and a small tree decorated in the corner of Emma's room, Colton got down on one knee. The ring he presented was simple, a thin gold band with a small sapphire that reminded him of the mountain sky. He had spent weeks working extra hours to afford it, and when Emma saw it, she gasped. "Emma Jane Winters, you saved my life in more ways than one. You gave me a reason to come back from the darkness, and you have given me a future worth living. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner in all things?" "Yes," Emma breathed, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They married in early March of 1885 when the first wildflowers began to push through the melting snow. The ceremony took place in the small church at the center of Montezuma, with most of the town in attendance. Emma wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of early crocuses. Colton wore his best suit, brushed and pressed, his dark hair slicked back and his eyes shining with emotion as he watched his bride walk down the aisle. Doc Holloway stood as Colton's best man, and Mrs. Abernathy served as Emma's matron of honor. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Colton kissed Emma with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception was held at the town hall, with food contributed by neighbors and music provided by a fiddle player and a man with a harmonica. Colton and Emma danced their first dance as husband and wife, swaying to a slow melody while everyone watched and applauded. Mrs. Fletcher presented them with a quilt she had sewn, each square containing a different pattern, telling the story of their courtship and marriage. "For your new home," she said, hugging them both. "May it keep you warm through all the winters to come." That night, they stayed in a hotel room in town, a luxury they had splurged on for their wedding night. In the privacy of their room, with the lamp burning low and the sounds of celebration fading in the distance, they came together as husband and wife. It was tender and passionate, filled with whispered words and gentle touches, the culmination of months of longing and love. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the sheets, Emma traced the scar on Colton's chest, the puckered flesh that marked where the bullet had entered and nearly ended his life. "I am so grateful this did not take you from me," she whispered. "I am grateful you did not give up on me," Colton replied, kissing her forehead. "You are the strongest person I have ever known, Emma Harper, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," she assured him. "You already are." Spring brought new beginnings. Colton and Emma moved into a small cabin on their land, a structure that had been left by the previous owner. It was rough but serviceable, and they set about making it a home. Emma planted a garden, turning the soil and carefully placing seeds for vegetables and herbs. Colton began building a barn, working with wood and nails and determination, his body now fully healed and strong once more. They hired help when needed, paying fair wages to men looking for honest work. By summer, the barn was complete, and Colton purchased their first horses, 3 mares and a stallion with good bloodlines. He had a gift for working with animals, a patience and intuition that Emma admired. She would watch from the porch as he gentled a skittish mare, his voice low and soothing, his movements slow and deliberate. In the evenings, they sat on that porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains, their hands clasped together, their hearts full. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the silence that sometimes fell between them. Emma would read aloud from books ordered from a catalog, and Colton would whittle small figures from wood, a hobby he had picked up as a boy. Life was not without its challenges. A late frost killed some of Emma's seedlings, and one of the mares developed a hoof infection that required careful treatment. But they faced each obstacle together, drawing strength from their partnership. The love between them deepened with each passing day, growing from the passionate spark of new romance into something more profound and enduring. By the time autumn arrived, painting the aspen groves in shades of gold and crimson, Emma had news that filled them both with joy and trepidation. She was pregnant, due to deliver sometime in late April or early May. Colton's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We are going to be parents," he said, wonder in his voice. "You are going to be a mother and I am going to be a father." "Are you frightened?" Emma asked, searching his face. "Terrified," he admitted, "but also happier than I have ever been. We are going to raise this child with love and kindness, Emma. We are going to give them the childhood we both wished we had." Emma nodded, her own fears easing at his words. They had both come from difficult circumstances, but they had survived and thrived. They would do the same for their child. The winter of 1885 was spent preparing for the baby's arrival. Colton built a cradle from pine, sanding it smooth and carving their initials into the headboard. Emma sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her needle flying through fabric as she hummed softly. They converted the small second room in the cabin into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and hanging curtains Emma had stitched from cheerful calico. Doc Holloway visited regularly, checking on Emma's health and offering advice. He was pleased with her progress, declaring her strong and healthy, well suited for childbirth. "You have good hips and a strong constitution," he told her matter-of-factly, making Emma blush and Colton cough to hide his laugh. "But I want you to take it easy in the final months. No heavy lifting, plenty of rest." Colton took the doctor's orders to heart, perhaps a bit too seriously. He hovered over Emma, insisting she sit down whenever she tried to do any chores, bringing her tea and pillows and blankets until she finally laughed and told him she was pregnant, not dying. "I just want to take care of you," he said, looking sheepish. "You took care of me when I needed it most. Let me do the same for you." How could she argue with that? So she allowed herself to be pampered, reading and knitting and enjoying the strange luxury of having someone cater to her needs. She had spent so much of her life being strong and independent, proving she could survive on her own. It was both foreign and wonderful to lean on someone else, to trust that Colton would be there to catch her if she fell. Spring arrived with the rush of snowmelt and the return of birdsong. Emma grew round and ungainly, her small frame struggling to accommodate the growing child within her. She experienced the discomforts of late pregnancy, the aching back and swollen ankles, the difficulty sleeping when the baby kicked and rolled. But she never complained, marveling instead at the miracle happening inside her body. On a warm afternoon in late April, as the world burst with new life and possibility, Emma's labor began. Colton had been mending fence when she called out to him, her voice tight with pain and urgency. He dropped his tools and ran, finding her bent over in the kitchen, one hand pressed to her swollen belly. "It is time," she gasped. "The baby is coming." Colton helped her to the bedroom, then rode like the devil himself was chasing him to fetch Doc Holloway. The physician arrived within the hour, bringing his medical bag and a calm, professional demeanor that helped ease Colton's panic. "Boil water and fetch clean linens," Doc instructed, already rolling up his sleeves. "And then stay close. She is going to need you." The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Colton stayed by Emma's side, holding her hand, wiping the sweat from her brow, murmuring words of encouragement when she cried out in pain. He felt helpless and awed in equal measure, watching his wife endure this primal struggle to bring their child into the world. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, a new sound filled the cabin. The sharp, indignant wail of a newborn baby, furious at being thrust from warmth and darkness into cold and light. Doc Holloway laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy. "You have a son," he announced, holding up the squirming, blood-streaked infant. "A healthy, strong boy with a good set of lungs on him." Emma sobbed, reaching for her child, and Doc placed the baby on her chest. Colton stared in wonder at the tiny human they had created, so impossibly small and perfect. The boy had a shock of dark hair and scrunched-up features, his little fists waving as he protested this new world. "Hello, my love," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her exhausted face. "Hello, my beautiful boy." Colton bent down, kissing Emma's forehead, then gently touching his son's soft head. "What should we name him?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Emma looked up at her husband, her eyes shining. "I was thinking about your father. What was his name?" "James," Colton said. "James Harper. He died when I was young, but my mother always said he was a good man." "Then James it is," Emma decided. "James Colton Harper, a strong name for our strong boy." They called him Jamie, and he became the center of their world. Colton proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to walk with the baby when he cried, changing dirty diapers without complaint, singing off-key lullabies that somehow soothed the infant to sleep. Emma nursed their son and marveled at the fierce love that consumed her, a protectiveness so intense it sometimes frightened her. The ranch thrived alongside their growing family. Colton's herd of horses expanded, and he gained a reputation for breeding quality stock. Buyers came from as far as Denver to purchase his animals, paying good prices for horses that were well-trained and gentle. Emma sold eggs and vegetables from their productive garden, and she began taking in sewing work, her skill with a needle bringing in extra income. By the time Jamie celebrated his first birthday in April of 1887, they had saved enough money to expand the cabin, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Colton did most of the work himself, with help from neighbors who came for barn-raising parties that turned into community events. The people of Montezuma had embraced the young couple, welcoming them fully into the fabric of small-town life. Emma discovered she was pregnant again in the fall of 1887, and this time, the news was met with quiet contentment rather than nervous excitement. They knew what to expect now, had weathered the challenges of new parenthood and emerged stronger for it. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace Ellen Harper, arrived in May of 1888. She had Emma's honey-colored hair and Colton's dark eyes, and from the moment of her birth, she owned her father's heart completely. "I am in so much trouble," Colton said, cradling his newborn daughter while Jamie toddled around the room, curious about this new addition. "She is going to have me wrapped around her little finger for the rest of my life." Emma laughed, exhausted but radiant, as it should be. Every girl should have a father who adores her. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Jamie grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved helping his father with the horses. Grace was all energy and laughter, fearless in a way that gave Emma heart palpitations. A third child, another boy they named Thomas, arrived in 1890, rounding out their family. Through it all, the love between Colton and Emma never wavered. If anything, it grew deeper, enriched by shared struggles and triumphs. They worked side by side, building their ranch into a prosperous operation. They raised their children with the values they held dear, teaching them kindness, honesty, and the importance of hard work. On their 10th wedding anniversary, in March of 1895, Colton surprised Emma with a gift. He led her outside where a new structure stood gleaming in the morning sun. It was a greenhouse, with glass panes and a sturdy frame, large enough for Emma to grow flowers and herbs year-round. "You have given me so much," Colton said, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind as they stood admiring the building. "A home, a family, a life I never dreamed I could have. I wanted to give you something back. I know how much you love your garden, and I thought this might let you enjoy it even when the snow is falling." Emma turned in his arms, tears running down her cheeks. "It is perfect. You are perfect. How did I get so lucky?" "I am the lucky one," Colton insisted. "You saved my life, Emma, and then you gave me a reason to live it." They kissed, there in the morning light with their children playing nearby and the mountains standing eternal watch over their valley. It was a kiss that held a decade of love and commitment, of shared joys and weathered sorrows, of promises kept and dreams realized. That evening, after the children were tucked into bed, Colton and Emma sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. The air was cool but pleasant, carrying the scent of pine and the distant sound of the creek. Emma leaned her head on Colton's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "You ever think about that day?" Emma asked softly. "The day you were shot?" "Sometimes," Colton admitted. "Usually when I see Mrs. Fletcher and Sarah around town. Sarah is almost 17 now, can you believe that? Nearly grown. And she is alive because I happened to be in the right place at the right time." "Or maybe you were exactly where you were meant to be," Emma suggested. "Maybe everything happened the way it was supposed to, so that we could end up here together." "I like that idea," Colton said. "The thought that all the pain and struggle was leading us to this, to each other." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The vastness of the universe spread above them, making their problems seem small and their love seem infinite. "I would do it all again," Emma said suddenly. "Every sleepless night keeping watch over you, every moment of fear and uncertainty. I would do it all again in a heartbeat if it meant ending up here, with you, with our children, with this life we have built." Colton turned to look at his wife, seeing the lines that time and experience had etched on her face, the silver threads beginning to show in her hair. She was more beautiful to him now than she had been that day he first woke to find her beside his bed. Time had not diminished her beauty, it had refined it, revealing the strength and grace that had always existed beneath the surface. "I love you, Emma Harper," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I loved you when I woke up and saw you sitting there like an angel keeping watch. I loved you when you agreed to marry me. I loved you when you gave birth to our children, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Emma replied, reaching up to cup his face in her hand. "My brave cowboy who came back from the edge of death. My husband, my partner, my heart." They kissed again, tender and sweet, the kind of kiss that came from years of knowing each other intimately, of learning every curve and contour, every preference and passion. When they finally parted, both were smiling, content in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. The years continued to unfold, bringing changes and challenges but never shaking the foundation of their love. Jamie grew into a fine young man, taking over more and more of the ranch work as Colton's hair turned gray. He courted and married a girl from a neighboring ranch, a sweet-natured young woman named Mary, and they gave Colton and Emma their first grandchildren. Grace proved to be as headstrong as her mother, defying convention by attending teachers' college in Denver. She returned to Montezuma to teach at the local school, eventually marrying a gentle schoolteacher from Kansas who appreciated her intelligence and independence. Thomas followed in his brother's footsteps, staying on the ranch and developing a talent for breeding championship horses. By the time Colton and Emma celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary in 1910, they were grandparents several times over. The original cabin had been expanded and renovated multiple times, growing into a sprawling ranch house that could accommodate the entire family for Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings. On the day of their anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate. There was a feast, with tables laden with food stretching across the yard. Music played and children ran shrieking with laughter while adults talked and reminisced. As the sun began to set, Jamie stood and called for everyone's attention. "I want to propose a toast," he said, raising his glass. "To my parents, Colton and Emma Harper. 25 years ago, my mother sat vigil over my father's sick for 3 weeks, refusing to leave his side even when everyone said he would not survive. That kind of devotion, that kind of love is rare. And it has been the foundation of our family ever since. Everything we have, everything we are, comes from the example they set. So here is to 25 more years and to a love that has inspired all of us." "Hear, hear," the gathering chorused, raising their glasses. Colton and Emma stood, hand in hand, as their family toasted them. Emma's eyes were wet with tears, and Colton's throat felt tight with emotion. They had built all of this together, created a legacy that would outlive them both. Later, when the party had wound down and the guests had departed, Colton and Emma walked to the creek that ran through their property. The moon was full, casting silver light across the water, and the mountains rose like sentinels around them. They had walked this path countless times over the years, and their feet knew every root and stone. They stopped at their favorite spot, where a flat rock jutted out over the water, and sat down together. Emma leaned against Colton's chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, his chin resting on top of her head. 25 years, Emma mused. It feels like a lifetime and also like no time at all. "I know what you mean," Colton said. "Some days I still feel like that young cowboy waking up to find a beautiful woman keeping watch over me. Other days I feel every one of my 53 years. Emma laughed softly. "We have lived well, Colton. We have loved well. Not everyone can say that." "No," he agreed. "We have been blessed beyond measure." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the water and the night sounds of the wilderness around them. An owl hooted somewhere in the darkness, and a breeze whispered through the pines. This land had become home in a way neither of them had ever experienced before, a place where they could be wholly themselves. "Do you remember what I said to you that day you woke up?" Emma asked. "That you had been gone for so long, but you were safe now." "I remember," Colton said. "Your voice was the first thing I heard when I came back, like a lighthouse guiding me home." "You were safe," Emma repeated, "and you still are. You always will be as long as I am here." "And you are safe with me," Colton replied, "always and forever." The moon climbed higher in the sky, and still they sat. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a love strong enough to weather any storm. They had started with nothing but determination and devotion, and they had created an empire of the heart. As they finally stood to walk back to the house, Colton took Emma's hand, threading his fingers through hers as he had done thousands of times before. They walked slowly, savoring the cool night air and the peace of their land. Lights glowed in the windows of their home, warm and welcoming, promising comfort and rest after a long, joyful day. "Thank you," Colton said as they reached the porch steps. "For what?" Emma asked. "For staying," he replied simply. "For choosing to keep watch over a dying cowboy instead of walking away. For giving me a chance at this life. For loving me when I did not know I needed to be loved." Emma stood on tiptoe to kiss him, her lips soft against his. "Thank you for coming back to me. For choosing life when death would have been easier. For building this dream with me. For loving me exactly as I am." They went inside together, closing the door on the night and the world beyond their threshold. In the sanctuary of their home, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, they prepared for bed. It was a ritual they had performed together for 25 years, comfortable and familiar, yet still touched with tenderness. As they lay in bed, Emma's head resting on Colton's shoulder, his arm around her waist, they spoke quietly of small things and great things, of plans for tomorrow and memories of yesterday. Eventually, Emma's breathing slowed and deepened, and Colton knew she had drifted off to sleep. He lay awake a while longer, staring at the ceiling and counting his blessings. He thought about that day in September 1884 when a bullet had torn through his chest and nearly ended his story before it had truly begun. He thought about waking to find Emma there, a woman he barely knew who had chosen to save him. He thought about every moment since, the life they had built from that unlikely beginning. If he had died that day, he would have missed all of this. The love, the laughter, the children and grandchildren, the home and the land, and the deep contentment that came from knowing he had lived well and loved well. Emma had given him that chance, and he had seized it with both hands, determined to make the most of the gift he had been given. As sleep finally claimed him, Colton's last thought was a prayer of gratitude to whatever force in the universe had brought them together. Then he surrendered to dreams, his hand still holding Emma's, two hearts beating in time, two souls joined for all eternity. The next morning dawned bright and clear, promising another beautiful day in the mountains. Colton woke first, as he usually did, and lay for a moment watching Emma sleep. Even after all these years, the sight of her peaceful face still filled him with wonder. He leaned over and placed a soft kiss on her forehead, careful not to wake her. Rising quietly, he dressed and made his way to the kitchen to start the coffee. As it perked on the stove, he stepped out onto the porch to greet the morning. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Birds sang their morning songs, and in the distance, he could hear the horses nickering in the pasture. This was his kingdom, small in the grand scheme of the world but vast in what it meant to him. Every fence post, every building, every tree had a memory attached. This land was soaked with his sweat and Emma's determination, with their children's laughter and their own tears of joy and sorrow. It was more than property. It was proof that their love had substance and weight, that what they had built together would endure long after they were gone. Emma emerged from the bedroom a short while later, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing her dressing gown. She padded over to Colton and wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek against his back. "Good morning," she murmured, her voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning, my love," he replied, turning in her arms to embrace her properly. "Did you sleep well?" "I always sleep well when I am next to you," Emma said, smiling up at him. "What are your plans for today?" "I thought I might ride out to check the north pasture," Colton said. "Jamie mentioned one of the mares might be close to foaling. What about you?" "I promised Grace I would help her with the spring pageant at the school," Emma replied. "She needs costumes sewn, and you know how much I enjoy a project." They stood together on the porch, watching the sun climb higher, burning off the morning mist. It was an ordinary day, filled with ordinary tasks, the kind of day that had made up the fabric of their lives together. Yet there was nothing ordinary about the love they shared, the partnership they had forged, the family they had created. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not been walking past that bank on that particular day?" Colton asked suddenly. Emma considered the question, then shook her head. "I try not to. The what-ifs can drive a person mad. All I know is that you were there, you did save that little girl, and you did survive. Everything else followed from those facts. We are here now together. That is what matters." "You are right," Colton agreed. "As usual." Emma laughed and swatted his arm playfully. "I am not always right, but I am right about this. We have been given a gift, Colton. A life filled with love and purpose. Some people search their whole lives and never find what we have. So instead of wondering about what might have been, let us be grateful for what is." "I am grateful," Colton assured her, pulling her close for a kiss. "Every single day I am grateful." They went about their separate tasks that day, but always with the knowledge that they would come back together at the end of it. That was the rhythm of their lives, the ebb and flow of independence and togetherness that had kept their relationship strong. They supported each other's passions and pursuits while maintaining their own identities, never losing sight of what made them individuals even as they functioned as a unit. That evening, as they sat down to dinner together, Emma shared stories about the school children and their enthusiasm for the upcoming pageant. Colton told her about the mare who had indeed given birth to a healthy foal, a beautiful filly with a white star on her forehead. They talked and laughed, their conversation as easy and comfortable as an old quilt. After dinner, they sat in the living room, Emma with her sewing and Colton with his whittling. The lamp cast a warm glow, and the crackle of the fire in the hearth provided a soothing backdrop. This was peace, Colton thought. This was contentment. After a lifetime of wandering and uncertainty, he had found his place in the world, and it was beside this woman who had refused to let him die. As the clock on the mantel chimed 9, Emma set aside her sewing and stretched. "I think I am ready for bed," she announced. "It has been a long day." Colton nodded, putting away his whittling knife and the figure he had been working on, a horse for his newest grandchild. They went through their evening routine, banking the fire, checking the doors, turning down the lamps. Then they retired to their bedroom, where they had shared so many nights, created so many memories. As they settled under the covers, Emma snuggled close to Colton, her head finding its familiar spot on his shoulder. His arm came around her automatically, holding her secure. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," he replied, his words a vow renewed every single day, always and forever. They drifted off to sleep together, two souls intertwined, dreaming of tomorrow and all the tomorrows yet to come. Outside, the mountains kept their vigil, ancient and unchanging, bearing witness to the love story that had unfolded in their shadow. Years continued to pass, bringing more grandchildren, more milestones, more moments of joy and occasional sorrow. Colton and Emma grew old together gracefully, their hair turning white, their movements slowing, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it burned brighter with each passing year, refined by time into something pure and precious. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1935, surrounded by 3 generations of family. The ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the region, a testament to their hard work and vision. But more than the land or the horses or the prosperity they had achieved, Their legacy was the love they had modeled for their children and grandchildren. During the anniversary celebration, Sarah Fletcher, now a grandmother herself, stood to speak. "I owe my life to Colton Harper," she said, her voice strong despite her 71 years. "When I was 6 years old, he put himself in harm's way to protect me, and Emma Harper loved him so fiercely that she willed him back to life. Their story has inspired me every day since. They have shown all of us what real love looks like, what commitment means, what it means to choose each other every single day through good times and bad." There was not a dry eye in the house as Sarah finished speaking. Colton and Emma stood together, hands clasped, faces lined with age but eyes still bright with love. They had weathered 50 years together, and they would weather however many more they were granted. As Colton helped Emma into bed that night, both exhausted but happy from the day's festivities, he found himself thinking about the journey they had taken together. From that first moment when he had opened his eyes to find her keeping watch, through courtship and marriage, through building a ranch and raising children, through all the challenges and triumphs that life had thrown their way, they had remained steadfast. "Thank you for 50 years, he said softly, kissing Emma's forehead. "Thank you for every moment." "Thank you for waking up," Emma replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for choosing to fight to live to love me." "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done," Colton said. "And the best." Emma smiled, her eyes drifting closed. "Sleep now, my darling, I will be right here." "You always are," Colton whispered. "You always have been." He lay down beside her, pulling her gently into his arms, and they slept as they had for 50 years together, safe home. In the years that followed, age began to take its inevitable toll. Colton's joints ached on cold mornings, and Emma's eyesight dimmed, making it harder for her to do the detailed sewing she loved. But they adapted, supporting each other through each new limitation, finding joy in simpler pleasures. They spent long afternoons on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard. They reminisced about the past, telling stories to anyone who would listen about the early days of the ranch, about surviving harsh winters and celebrating good harvests, about the time Grace had hidden a litter of kittens in the barn without permission, and the time Jamie had accidentally let all the horses out of the pasture. Their children worried about them, especially as they reached their 80s, but Colton and Emma refused to be separated or moved from the ranch. This was their home, they insisted. They had built it together, and they would leave it together when the time came. That time came on a quiet spring morning in 1942, when Emma failed to wake. Colton, at 80 years old, found his wife of 57 years lying peacefully beside him, her face serene, her hand still resting in his. The doctor later said her heart had simply stopped, that she had passed in her sleep without pain or fear. Colton was devastated. For 3 days he barely spoke, barely ate, his grief a palpable thing that filled the ranch house. His children gathered around him, trying to comfort him, but he seemed unreachable, lost in a place where only he and Emma had ever existed. On the 4th day, Jamie found his father sitting on the porch at dawn, staring out at the mountains that had watched over their lives for so many years. "Dad," Jamie said gently, sitting down beside him, "you need to eat something. You need to take care of yourself. Mom would want that." Colton was quiet for a long moment, then he spoke, his voice rough from disuse and tears. "She saved my life once, you know. Kept vigil for 3 weeks straight when I was in a coma. Everyone said I would not survive, but she refused to leave my side. She brought me back." "I know, Dad," Jamie said. "You have told us the story 100 times." "She saved my life," Colton repeated. "And then she gave me a reason to live it. 57 years together, not long enough, could never be long enough. Jamie put his arm around his father's shoulders, and for a moment father and son sat in silence, sharing their grief. "What do I do now?" Colton asked, and he sounded lost, like a child in the dark. "How do I go on without her?" "You do what she would want," Jamie replied. "You keep living. You spend time with your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. You tell us stories about her so we never forget. You honor her memory by being grateful for the time you had, not bitter about the time you lost." Colton nodded slowly, processing his son's words. Jamie was right, of course. Emma would not want him to fade away in grief. She would want him to keep living, to find joy in the family they had created together. Emma's funeral was attended by what seemed like half the county. She had touched so many lives through her kindness and generosity, through her strength and grace. People came from miles away to pay their respects, sharing stories about how Emma had helped them through hard times, how her smile had brightened their day, how her wisdom had guided them through difficult decisions. Colton stood at her graveside, which they had chosen together years before, on a hillside overlooking the ranch with a view of the mountains beyond. As the preacher spoke about eternal rest and heavenly reunion, Colton felt some of the crushing weight of his grief ease. Emma was not truly gone, he realized. She lived on in their children, in the ranch they had built, in the love they had shared. Death could take her physical presence, but it could not erase the impact she had made on the world. In the months that followed, Colton slowly returned to life. He spent time with his family, delighting in his great-grandchildren's antics and offering advice to his grandchildren as they navigated their own relationships and challenges. He tended Emma's greenhouse, keeping her flowers and herbs alive, finding comfort in the familiar tasks she had once performed. On their 58th wedding anniversary, which would have been in March of 1943, Colton rode out to Emma's grave. He had done this every week since her passing, bringing fresh flowers and talking to her as though she could hear him. Today, he brought a bouquet of crocuses, the same flowers she had carried on their wedding day. "I miss you," he said, kneeling beside her headstone. "Every moment of every day I miss you. But I am trying to live the way you would want me to. I am trying to find joy and purpose." Our great-grandson, little Colton, he reminds me so much of Jamie at that age, and Grace's daughter is getting married in June. "You would love her, young man. He is kind and hardworking. Reminds me of myself when I was courting you." He paused, his weathered hand resting on the cool marble of her headstone. "I am ready, Emma. When my time comes, I am ready. I have lived a full life, a blessed life, all because of you. You saved me twice, once from death and once from a life without purpose. I will never stop being grateful for that." A breeze whispered through the pines, and for a moment, Colton could have sworn he heard Emma's voice carried on the wind, telling him she loved him, telling him to be patient, that they would be together again soon. Colton Harper passed away peacefully in his sleep on a warm July night in 1944, at the age of 82. His family found him the next morning, lying in the bed he had shared with Emma for so many years, a slight smile on his face, as though he had been dreaming of something wonderful. They buried him next to Emma, their graves side by side on the hillside overlooking the ranch. A single headstone marked both their resting places with a simple inscription: "Colton and Emma Harper, beloved parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. Together in life, together in death, together forever." The ranch continued to thrive under Jamie's stewardship, then passed to his children and their children after that. Each generation added their own chapter to the story, but they never forgot the foundation on which it was all built. The tale of the cowboy who was saved by a woman's vigil became family legend. told and retold around dinner tables and campfires, inspiring each new Harper to believe in the power of love and devotion. Sarah Fletcher's descendants stayed in touch with the Harper family, the bond between them forged that day in 1884 never fully breaking. They attended weddings and funerals, christenings and anniversaries, two families forever linked by a single act of heroism and the love story that followed. In the main house on the Harper Ranch, which had been expanded and modernized over the years but never lost its essential character, a special room was set aside as a family museum. In it, visitors could see Colton's hat and gun from his cowboy days, Emma's wedding dress carefully preserved, the cradle Colton had built for Jamie, and photographs documenting their life together. But the most treasured item was a leather-bound journal Emma had kept, chronicling those 3 weeks she sat vigil by Colton's bedside. In faded ink, her handwriting growing shakier as exhaustion took its toll, she had recorded every detail. His temperature, his breathing, the way Doc Holloway changed his bandages. But she had also written about her hopes and fears, her growing love for this man she barely knew, her determination that he would survive. The final entry, written on the morning Colton woke up, reads simply, "He opened his eyes today. My prayers have been answered. I do not know what the future holds, but I know I want to be part of his. I think I have loved him from the moment I saw him fall, and I will love him for whatever time we are granted. This is only the beginning." She had been right. It had been only the beginning of a love story that spanned decades, that created a legacy measured not in land or wealth, but in the lives touched and the love shared. Colton and Emma Harper had proven that real love was not about grand gestures or perfect moments, but about showing up every day, about choosing each other through good times and bad, about building something that would outlast them both. Their story lived on in the mountains of Colorado, in the ranch that bore their name, in the descendants who carried their blood and their values. It lived on in the tale told to children about a woman who refused to let a brave man die and a cowboy who spent the rest of his life proving he was worthy of that devotion. And somewhere, in a place beyond the understanding of mortals, two souls reunited, holding hands as they had always done, watching over the family they had created and the love they had shared. Together in life, together in death, together forever. The mountains stood as eternal witness, their peaks touching the sky, their valleys sheltering generations of Harpers who would continue the legacy. And in the evening breeze that whispered through the pines, in the rush of the creek over stones, in the warm light that glowed from the windows of the ranch house, the love of Colton and Emma Harper lived on, a beacon of hope and inspiration for all who heard their story. This was their happily ever after, not a fairy tale ending but something richer and more real. A love tested by time and hardship, strengthened by devotion and partnership, fulfilled by a life well lived and a family well raised. It was everything they had dreamed of that night they first confessed their love, and more than they could have ever imagined. Their journey had begun with a bullet and a vigil, with death averted and life reclaimed. It had continued through 57 years of marriage, through children and grandchildren, through seasons and years, through all the small moments and grand events that make up a life. And it had ended not with sadness but with completion, two lives fully lived, two hearts that had beaten as one. In the end, that was the greatest legacy Colton and Emma Harper left behind. Not the ranch or the horses or the material wealth they had accumulated, but the proof that true love exists, that it is worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth devoting your entire life to. That when you find it, you hold on to it with everything you have, and you never let go. Their story was the stuff of legend, but it was also deeply human. It was about two people who found each other against all odds and chose to build something beautiful together. It was about a woman's steadfast devotion and a man's grateful heart. It was about partnership and family, about roots planted deep and love that grows stronger with time. And as the sun set behind the mountains on another day in Montezuma, Colorado, casting long shadows across the valley where the Harper Ranch sprawled, the legacy of Colton and Emma lived on, their love story eternal, their spirits forever intertwined. This was their gift to the world, this testament to the power of love, and it would endure long after the last Harper bearing their name had passed from this earth. Because true love never really dies. It transforms, becoming memory and legend, inspiration and hope. It lives on in the stories told and the lessons learned, in the children raised and the values passed down. Colton and Emma Harper had loved well and lived well, and that was the greatest achievement any person could hope for. Their story was complete, their ending happy not because it was perfect but because it was real. They had faced death and chosen life. They had found love and nurtured it into something extraordinary. They had built a family and created a legacy. They had lived every day with gratitude and purpose, never taking for granted the gift they had been given. And when the final page of their story was written, when the last word was spoken and the last memory cherished, what remained was simple and profound. A love that conquered all, a partnership that lasted a lifetime, and a legacy that would inspire generations to come. This was the story of Colton and Emma Harper, the cowboy and the woman who saved him, who lived and loved in the wild mountains of Colorado, whose devotion to each other became legend, and whose happily ever after was earned through 57 years of choosing each other, every single day, until death reunited them in whatever lay beyond.